Welcome to Bible History 101. I'm Ezekiel, and we're going to get started talking about ancient Babylon and Sumeria. This is the first post-flood empire, the first post-flood kingdom that's in the earth, all right? So, we're going to go ahead and get started with Genesis, the 10th chapter. We're going to find out the origins of this, all right? So, Genesis 10 is what they call the Table of Nations. I did on my channel, Ezekiel Israel Teaching, I did a whole breakdown of all the different peoples that come out of Genesis 10, and even throughout the whole book of Genesis. That's where it's the origin of all things. It's the beginning, right? So, let's go to Genesis 10, and we're going to start with verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. All right? So these are all the different Hamitic nations, all the different African nations, right? You got Cush, which is the family of Ethiopians. Mizraim is the family of Egyptians. Phut is the family of Libyans. And Canaanites, or Canaan rather, is the family of Canaanites, the ancient Phoenicians. All right? And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Raamah, and Sabtekah. And the sons of Raamah were Sheba and Dedan. Okay, so Sheba and Dedan, those were the lands of Yemen and Oman today. These days it's not populated by the Ethiopians as much as it used to be back in the day, but the Ethiopians spread around the whole region. And as we're about to see, it's about to show you this. And Cush begat Nimrod. All right? He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Now, Nimrod historically is either Sargon of Akkad or someone who predates him. But Sargon of Akkad is usually mentioned in regards to Nimrod because Sargon is the first guy to be an emperor of all these different lands. Usually there was, in ancient times, there was a city, and there would be a king of that city, and he would never really expand until Sargon come along, and he expanded into this whole region that is about to talk about right here. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. All right, that's where you get the term Babylon from, is Babel. We're going to actually get into the origin of that word here in the next chapter, here in a minute. And Erech, that is Uruk in historical terms, in archaeological terms. U-R-U-K, Uruk. All right? In the Bible, it's known as Erech. And Akkad, see, that's where you get the term Akkadian from. And that's where you get the term Sargon of Akkad, A-K-K-A-D in historical terms. And Calneh in the land of Shinar. Shinar is what you call Sumeria. All right? It's the same thing. Just Hebrew transliteration makes it Shinar. All right? Out of that land went forth Ashur. So Ashur, if you read on down, come from Shem, not from Cush, not from Ham, but he was in the same land because Noah and his son stepped off the boat in modern day Turkey, right? So they all spread out from there, okay? And builded Nineveh and the city Rehoboth and Calah and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city. So the Bible is describing the origin of Mesopotamian cities, the origin of Mesopotamia, all right? It started with Babel and Sumeria, all right? Here we are in Genesis 11, starting with verse 1. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Everybody spoke the same language as Noah, which is the ancient Hebrew, the pure language. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And they dwelt there, right? That is Sumeria in modern terms. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. See, that's what God wanted them to do. He said, he wanted them to spread out over the whole earth, be fruitful and multiply, right? Replenish the earth, because the world had just been destroyed with a flood. All right. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they began to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Right? Because they weren't listening to the word of the Lord. Right? God wanted them to spread out and multiply in the earth. They said, no, we're not going to do that. We're all going to stay together and just build one big city. All right? Verse 7, go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. All right, so this is how you have different languages, different accents. Okay? Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. That's where the term Babylon comes from. That's where the term Babel comes from. It's like you're babbling. You're not saying anything substantial. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad from the face of the whole earth. You see that right there? So, the Lord scattered everyone right then. And if you read in Genesis 10, this is why the Bible says not to, the Bible says read it here little and there little, right? That's how you get the understanding, all right? And here when you start talking about the Semites, the Shemites, in Genesis 10, I'm going to read verse 24. And Arphaxad, the son of Shem, begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. Eber is where you get the term Hebrew from. All right? And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. So, what I wanted out of that is that during Peleg's days is when the Tower of Babel happened. It's when the earth was divided. That's where the earth went from Pangea to all the different continents. All right, it was as the people started to settle in Samaria. All right. So from Genesis 11, Genesis 11 goes into a little bit more depth on what was happening in Genesis 10 when it talked about Nimrod being a mighty one, a mighty hunter in the earth. He was a hunter not only of a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. He hunted men's souls. All right? And to get a better understanding of that, and I touched about this in my Christmas video on my channel, right? The origins of Christmas. I'm going to go to AccuTeach.com, and we're going to talk about the origins of Christmas and Easter and all that, just a little bit. Yeah. So this article is called "The Shocking Pagan Origins of Christmas." Christmas before it was Christmas. All right. So I'm gonna just jump down to the point. The root of this celebration is the name of this headline right here. When it says Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and it references Genesis 10. Nimrod is credited for building great cities such as Nineveh and Babylon. Well, that's how the city got its name, was the tower. He tried to turn people away from the Almighty. It says Yahweh right here, YHWH Tetragrammaton. The Lord had to stop the construction of this tower after the languages of men were confounded. To end the Tower of Babel's construction, the people were scattered to the four corners of the world. And we just read about that in Genesis 11. After the death of Cush, Nimrod took his mother, Semiramis, as a wife. Nimrod soon died himself. His body was cut into pieces and scattered throughout the kingdoms. And you can read more about this in The Tale of Two Babylons, I believe is the name of the book by Alexander Hislop. Semiramis taught the people that the only body part that remained missing was his male member, so he had gone to the sun. His name should now be called Baal, the sun god. So that's where the Canaanite sun god comes from, is the worship of Nimrod. She taught the people that Nimrod was the father of her unborn child, and the baby was conceived by him through rays of the sun. And see, this phallus symbol is where you get the obelisk from, the Egyptian obelisk, the even the one that is in Washington, D.C., right? Why they call it the Washington Monument. It has nothing to do with George Washington. It's an obelisk, all right? Let's see. This next paragraph. For his presence and power to reign supreme, phallic symbols and fires should be lit to honor him. The supposed child of that union is Horus, or Tammuz. And you read about Tammuz all the way in Ezekiel, which is about the 5th century. No, it's more 6th century BC. So all the way up into that time, thousands of years later, they're still worshiping Tammuz and Nimrod. All right, the reincarnate of Nimrod. Semiramis claimed a full-grown evergreen tree sprang out of the roots of a dead tree stump. This symbolized the springing forth of new life for Nimrod. Right, so some people say evergreen tree, some people say the palm tree. Like in ancient Babylon, they used a palm tree to symbolize this. That's the Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, not the Babylon by Nimrod. On the anniversary of Nimrod's birth, December 25th. And that's why all the different pagan traditions hold December 25th in high regard, like the Mithras and all these other kind of pagan deities. She said that Nimrod would visit the evergreen tree and leave gifts under it. This is the genesis of the Christmas tree symbol of Nimrod. This equates to approximately 9 months after Easter, or the day Ishtar. Shalom, bro. All right. So that's where you get the term Easter is the same as Ishtar, which is the Babylonian goddess name for Semiramis. All right. So Christmas and Easter, and all, if you look back into it, all pagan origins stem back to Nimrod and Semiramis and these myths created about them. All right. This equates to approximately 9 months after Easter, or the day Ishtar became pregnant with Tammuz, Nimrod reincarnated. All right, so that's basically all I wanted to touch on right here in this article. But it's a good article. All right, it's more focused on the origins of the pagan tradition side of it, not necessarily the historical aspect of Nimrod and his kingdom that he left, which, as you read here in Genesis 10, it goes into all the different land of Mesopotamia, from Shinar up to Akkad and Babylon. All right, so from there, let's go a little bit further into history. All right, a little bit further into history. We're still in Genesis. All right, so in Genesis, the 11th chapter, because we talked about the Tower of Babel, and shortly after the Tower of Babel, which was during the days of Peleg. You read here in Genesis 11, and starting with 10, it gives you the genealogy, the lineage from Shem through Arphaxad, and from Arphaxad to Salah, Salah to Eber, Eber to Peleg, and Peleg had a brother named Joktan, and that's they're also Hebrews, but they're not from the chosen lineage of Peleg to Ru to Serug to Nahor, and from Nahor to Terah. Terah being the father of Abraham. Here in Genesis 11 and verse 27. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. All right. So in Ur, one of the cities of Babylon, like what it says, the Chaldees right here. The Chaldees are the Babylonians. This is where Abraham and his family came from this first empire. All right. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren; she had no child. Right. And this is the point that I want to get to, verse 31. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. So Haran is in northern Mesopotamia. So they left from modern-day Kuwait to up to, I believe it's modern-day Iraq, could be Turkey or Syria, but that general area. All right. to go into the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. All right, so that's where Terah died, was in northern Mesopotamia. And then if you read later, like in chapter 12, the Lord visited Abraham and told him to go further down into Canaan, and his children would possess that land. All right, but something that I want to get to that is very, very interesting and interesting historically. This is Genesis, the 14th chapter. I'm going to start with verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar. All right, so when it says Amraphel, king of Shinar, it's referring to Hammurabi. All right, it's just a Hebrew transliteration of Hammurabi. And it makes a little bit of sense because in the Sumerian language, E or B means God, and in English, or rather in Hebrew, El means God. El, right? So you can see how the transliteration would form from Hammurabi or rather to Amraphel. All right, it's not that far of a leap. All right, it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Barad, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shem-Eber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All right, so you had, as I mentioned earlier, these kings of these city-states, all right, come and fight with one another. The Canaanite kings of the west, of the Mediterranean area, and the kings of the east, the king of Babylon, Hammurabi, and the king of Elam, Chedorlaomer. Elam is Persia, or an ancient name for the ancestors of the Persians. Right, and kings of the east, that general area, they wanted to take the Mediterranean area because that was big for trade, and that was the whole point of a lot of these ancient kingdoms coming and taking the land of Israel, was because that land was a perfect place to trade from the west, or rather to trade with Europe, Africa, and Asia, to have all that on lock. That's what a lot of these kings in ancient times wanted. And that's what you'll see whenever you look through history. It's coming to steal that land. All right? That's why it's very important. All right? It says, all these were joined together in the Vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. So the Salt Sea would be the Dead Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. The Canaanite natives were getting tired of these men of the east ruling over them. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Shavah, Kirjathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazes on Tamar. So basically these kings of the east came up and just wiped out these Canaanites, right? Put them in subjection. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar. And they joined battle with them in the Vale of Siddim, with Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. So here we are back with Hammurabi and these kings of the east fighting with these Canaanites, all right? Just shut them all down, right? And one thing that I do want to mention about Hammurabi before we go any further is when you hear Hammurabi mentioned, it's usually the Hammurabi Code, right? And what the Hammurabi Code will show you is that a lot of his laws were very similar to the laws of Moses. And why is that? That's because he had the same laws taught to him as everyone else, because everyone came from Noah. Noah taught his kids the laws of God because Noah was perfect and righteous in his generations. All right? So that's why the Hammurabi Code exists, and it's not exactly the same as the law of Moses, because they, Hammurabi specifically, and the Babylonians were not chosen by God. They didn't get the pure law like what Moses got. All right? So, back to the story here of these Hammurabi and his kings of the east fighting with the Canaanite kings, right? Verse 10. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Right? So, at this point, just to give you a little context, Abram had moved to the land of Canaan, and Lot came with him. Right? But they were so rich, so wealthy, that they couldn't live on the same area, right? They couldn't live on the same property because they had so much cattle, so many servants, right? So Abraham said, hey, we got to spread out a little bit. So Lot just so happened to go to Sodom, right? So when Sodom got ransacked by these kings of the east, they took Lot into captivity, all right? So verse 13. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner. And these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So that Dan is one of the northernmost cities in the land of Israel, right? So pursued them all the way up towards modern day Syria, all right? All the way from modern day Israel and Jordan, all the way up to Syria. All right. Where was I? Verse 15. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus, all the way up into Syria. Right. So this is where guerrilla warfare comes from. This is where these military tactics come from. People wonder why so-called American Indians were so skilled when it comes to war, is because that was always a tradition passed down by the forefathers. Even Abraham was skilled in war like this. Very tactical, very strategical, all right? And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people, all right? Verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. All right, and if you know the scripture and in Hebrews 7, you know who this Melchizedek is. All right, this Melchizedek, it literally means king of righteousness, right? And king of Salem means king of peace. All right, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. Verse 19, and he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which had delivered thy enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. Right, and Abram gave tithes to the priest of the Most High God, that king Melchizedek, the king of Salem. Verse 21, and the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou should say, I have made Abram rich. He said, no, I'm not going to be in debt to you. I'm not going to be in debt to you. So, again, even though Abram just fought on behalf of this king of Sodom, he was still wise enough to know, okay, this guy would take advantage of me given the opportunity. And Abram didn't do it for the king of Sodom, he did it for his brother Lot, right? His actually his nephew, but you know what I'm saying, his loved one. All right. Verse 24, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion, right? So he said, just pay the men who helped me, and we'll be straight. We'll be good. All right. So anybody tries to talk about like, oh, Hammurabi and all this and that, Hammurabi was nothing compared to the forefathers. All right. Abraham kicked his butt when it comes to war, man. He ambushed them by night, guerrilla warfare, took them out. All right. So when it comes to the ancient Babylonians, the ancient Sumerians, that's where all your pagan traditions, all your pagan customs come from. That's where your Christmas comes from. That's where your Easter comes from. All of that goes back to Nimrod and Semiramis. And truthfully and honestly, the ancient Babylonian kingdoms, it was the first empire in the earth, but it was not very long lived, because afterward and on its heels were the Egyptians. All right, and I do want to preface that a little bit before we get into them, but we're going to go ahead and touch on that a little bit in Psalms 105 and down to 17. So this is how Egypt got its start. All right, and like I said, we're going to preface that a little bit, but here's essentially how it happened. So this is book of Psalms 105 and verse, which one do we want to start with? 16. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. So this is how simultaneously the ancient Babylonian Empire, and even all of Mesopotamia, there was a famine all throughout the land of Canaan. All right, and that caused those kingdoms and empires to fall because they didn't have any grain. You don't have any grain. You don't have any control over the people. You don't have any food. You cannot go to war. You can't pay your men anything. All right. So, moreover, he called, this is verse 16 in Psalm 105. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. Verse 17. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, whose feet they hurt with fetters. He was laid in iron, until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. The king sent him and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. So the point that I want out of this is that with this famine coming, the Lord showed Joseph this famine was going to happen. And with that, Joseph, who was sold into Egypt at the time as a slave, he rose the ranks through interpreting Pharaoh's dream and telling him there's going to be a famine in the land, and here is the action that we need to do to prepare for it. And that is how Egypt became a ruling kingdom in the earth. That's how it became a ruling empire in the earth. It's through Joseph and his wisdom. All right. And if you read the book of Josephus, which it's not canon, it's not gospel, but it also talks about a little bit of history and how Abraham taught the Egyptians how to basically everything concerning geometry and astronomy, just basic things, right? So without our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, the Egyptian empire would have never come to pass anyway. All right, but it was of the Lord. Okay, so it says he made him Lord. This is verse 21 about Joseph. He made him Lord of his house and ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham, all right, in Africa. And he increased his people greatly and made them stronger than their enemies. All right. So with that, I just wanted to show how the transition from Babylon to Egypt. It wasn't in a situation where how you see in ancient kingdoms how, like, for example, the Persians took over all the land of the Babylonians through force and might. That's not how it happened between the transition between the Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians. That's not what happened. What happened was there was a famine through the land, and through that, Egypt was able to gain power and prominence through the wisdom of Joseph.